What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Thank you for clicking onto this reaction. I hope you're looking forward to it just as much as I am. If you haven't already, head over to the content creators page. That link is in the description box down below. If you haven't already and you're enjoying our content, you know what you need to do. You need to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, but we're going to jump straight into this one. Okay, so we're going to be starting a new series. There's multiple little series in this series, but we've just gone for Extra Histories playlist on World War II. So the first little mini-series in this playlist is World War II, the Resource War, Arsenal of Democracy, episode Extra History, episode 1. Let's go.
#1. Cicero once said that the sinews of war were infinite money. Never has that been more true than in the Second World War. This little bonus extra history series is going to be all about the complex economic struggle that underpinned the most colossal conflict in human history. These episodes are happening courtesy of the good folks at Paradox, who, after seeing those old Punic Wars episodes we made, approached us asking to sponsor a few episodes about the economic aspects of World War II in anticipation of the upcoming release of Hearts of Iron 4. Okay. And it's a great topic idea, so let's jump right in. First, let me set the stage. The year is 1939. Storm clouds are gathering over Europe. Hitler has already grabbed Austria, and Czechoslovakia is being gobbled up. The Italians have conquered Albania. Even as many try to deny it, every nation knows war is coming. Meanwhile, in the east, the Japanese have annexed Manchuria and are pushing further into China. Chinese resistance movements have flared up. For all intents and purposes, the east is already at war.
Yeah.
But most of the major players all have one goal in mind: resources. Economic power, industrial installations, natural resources, these all needed to be gathered and hoarded as quickly as possible, because every state knows, when war truly breaks all bounds, all the trade that keeps the world economy functioning will grind to a halt. Or so it was thought. In fact, many expected that the European nations would avoid war because their economies couldn't survive economic isolation. But that assumption hadn't kept the First World War from breaking out, and it wouldn't keep the Second. In truth, many of the pre-war planners had learned from the First World War and started preparing for just such a breakdown in trade years in advance. So let's take a look at the economies of some of the major players right at the outset of the war. The first big three are Germany, France, and Great Britain. These are the major European nations that would be in direct conflict with each other from the get-go. Germany, having been disarmed after World War I, had come roaring out of the Great Depression with one of the largest armaments programs the world had ever seen. France had invested heavily in static defenses, and Great Britain had restarted its fleet construction program after the lull. To really compare these countries, we're going to have to talk numbers. The way I see it, there are 4 statistics you really have to consider when talking about countries involved in a global war.
Okay, what
First,
are they?
GDP, or Gross Domestic Product. This tells you roughly how big an economy is, how much raw production it's capable of, which of course translates directly into tanks, bombs, guns, the material of war. Second, population. When we're looking at massive global conflicts that are going to determine the very survival of nations, you've got to look at the manpower they can draw upon. The larger the population, the larger the armies that nation can field, with more industrialized countries being able to draw on larger sections of their populace without disrupting the flow of basic goods like grain. If a conflict becomes a long-term struggle, population count becomes increasingly important as attrition starts to mount. Third, territorial extent. This isn't a perfect measure by any stretch, but it serves to give us a surface-level idea of relative natural resource control. In modern economies that require everything from oil to rubber to aluminum to run, territorial extent gives us a very rough idea of how self-sufficient these economies might be if cut off from global trade. It also tells us how much ground a nation can give up without being knocked out of the fight. Though it is worth noting that greater territorial extent also generally makes mobilization more difficult and defense more complex, so it's kind of a trade-off in some ways. Fourth, per capita income. Individual wage may seem like a strange metric when thinking about wartime economy, but it gives you a good idea of how developed an economy is. The higher the individual wage, the more advanced an economy you're usually dealing with. And this is actually super important because, in general, larger economies can take bigger hits without crumbling. Bombing one factory won't cause production to grind to a halt. They'll have a greater ability to synthesize or find alternatives for natural resources they don't have. They have a better internal network for transportation and distribution and such. So a nation that has a more advanced economy, even if it has the same GDP as another country, can remain an effective combatant much longer than a nation with a less advanced economy. This is why China collapsed into a guerrilla war almost immediately rather than fronting a centralized state effort, and it's why Italy capitulated so much quicker than Germany.
So it makes sense about the Chinese. So they had such a large area to cover, but they couldn't mobilize and defend each area because their economy and their technology wasn't advanced enough. So that sort of makes sense there.
It's also fascinating to think about in terms of the incredible Soviet effort to actually pick up and move their entire industrial base in the face of a German invasion. But we'll get to that later. For right now, let's look at some numbers. Now, all of the monetary figures I'm going to use here are in 1990 US dollars, just because that's how the most comprehensive data set I found converted it. So, the UK has a population of 47.5 million, a territorial reach of 245,000 square kilometers, a GDP of $284.2 billion, and a per capita income of about $5,983. Now, when compared to Germany's numbers, with a population of 68.6 million, 470,000 square kilometers of territory, a GDP of 351.4 billion, and a per capita income of 5,126 per head, the UK's numbers may look a bit low. But first we've got to factor in France. 42 million, a territorial reach of 551,000 square kilometers, a GDP of 185.6 billion, and a per capita income of $4,424.
Those last two are super low.
And perhaps far more importantly, we also have to factor in the British Empire. If you add in all of the colonies and dominions that Britain held at the time, that's a whopping 483...
Stole.
483.8 million people.
Yeah.
34,139,000 square kilometers in territory and 391 billion in GDP. But granted, if you leave out some of the more economically advanced dominions like Canada and Australia, the colony's collective per capita GDP was only $627. So less great. Sorry, I know that was a lot of numbers, but what does it all tell us? All of those numbers basically tell us that Germany needed to win this war before the UK could bring its empire to bear. But it also tells us that the British Empire was unwieldy. It was spread out, and it had an incredibly low per capita GDP in a lot of places, which meant that there wasn't a lot in those places that could be diverted to war production. And those sections of the empire would probably collapse at the first show of hostile force. And that reality very much played into the overarching strategy of the war. Blitzkrieg was not only a tactical or even a strategic idea, but an operational one. Germany had stockpiled material before the war. They believed they had better military leadership and better esprit de corps. Their great hope was to expand fast enough using those early advantages to win total victory. But their more realistic planning told them that they still had no choice but to expand rapidly, so that they could bring in the resources, population, and industrial capacity that they would need to fight a protracted war. Seizing an early advantage was Germany's best chance. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Japan was in much the same situation. The famous Japanese Admiral Yamamoto estimated that he could win for 6 months if the US entered the war, but if Japan had not secured victory by then, loss was assured. If we look at the statistics for Japan and China, which I'll put down below just so I don't belabor you with more numbers, we can see that China has a substantially higher population, and thus also a higher GDP, but a much lower per capita GDP.
Okay. It's quite a good question. If you knew you only had 6 months to win the war, would you push for the fight?
Or let's say not even to win, but to gain enough territorial grounds that you could then be able to function and resupply your army.
Okay.
So 6 months.
6 months.
And you've got to get, let's say, 3/3 of the gains you need for complete victory to get the complete victory. Do you get what I'm saying? So if you get 3/3, so no, you don't need the whole thing. You need 3/3 to be able to.
3/3 is a whole.
So you got 6 months to take 3/3.
Yeah.
So there's only a third left. There's a little bit left.
Right.
That last little bit can take you as long as you need to once you've got the majority part. But you need this part to be able to finish it off. Do you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you've only got 6 months. Here's the oil fields. You're over here. You only have 6 months to get all this area for the resources. If you can get that in 6 months, it doesn't matter how extra longer it takes to get that last bit, because you have all your resources. Don't matter if it takes 10 years, 5 years, or you get it done quickly.
But I've got 6 months to get that.
You've got 6 months. If you don't get that, you lose. So you haven't got to do a complete victory.
Yeah, I think if I have a look at the men and the resources that I have, I'm probably going to go for it.
Yeah.
What about you?
It all depends on the situation. It all depends on the situation.
If I can guarantee I'm not being attacked.
That's what I was about to say. So like, it all depends. Lucky enough, like, so like Japan are also able to talk to Germany, get resources for Germany. There was other people, Italy that was on the Axis side in that time. Russia was so busy that they didn't really, towards the later parts of it, they didn't care about the East until the end because they were so busy in the West. Like, yeah, so it's so, there's so many variables to it, but I don't think I would.
Okay.
I think that I would try and stockpile more. I don't know. I'd wait more time and try and build up a better plan. But at the same time, the reason why they're choosing to go now is because Japan's also doing what they're doing, so it's right time.
Yeah.
It's nearly a perfect time. We're not in the time. We're not making those decisions. But yeah, it's an interesting thought. You guys let us know what you think.
For Japan and China, which I'll put down below just so I don't belabor you with more numbers, we can see that China has a substantially higher population, and thus also a higher GDP, but a much lower per capita GDP, meaning that China would probably lose a conventional war, but they'd still be very hard to occupy if they got any outside help. And then there were the two wild cards, the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had vast natural resources, a huge population, and a high GDP, but with a low per capita wage, meaning they had a less advanced economy than many of the other European powers. Russia would play an enormous role in the struggle to come, but economically, its entire focus would be using what industrial resources it had to arm and equip the vast forces it could muster. The United States, on the other hand, for the entire length of the war, from 1938, well before it was involved, to the war's conclusion in 1945, had a GDP greater than every major Axis power combined. A GDP which was also greater than all the other major allies put together. Not only that, but the US was protected by oceans from the conflict itself. This is why the United States would serve as
the ocean is the United States' biggest weapon. It is isolated. It is nearly impossible to invade. Crazy.
As the arsenal of democracy. Join us next time as we talk about Lend-Lease and how American industrial output would be used to keep its beleaguered, soon-to-be allies afloat before the American nation gathered the will to fight. See you then.
Mate, I am definitely looking forward to finding out what's in store for us in the next episode. If you guys enjoyed this reaction, you know what you need to do. But if you haven't already, head over to the content creators page that links in the description box down below. Like, comment, subscribe, and we will catch you in the next video.
Au revoir, mes amis.